Hi, everybody. Zach DePiero here. I'm an assistant professor of English and composition at Penn State, Abington. I couldn't make it back out to California for this conference, but I'm hoping that some of what I can share through this video will be helpful for your writing courses, possibly even your writing programs. Special thanks to my co-panelist, Nelson Graff, for helping me get set up with all the logistics here. Basically, I'll be leading you through teaching reading or guiding reading in first year composition. So without further ado, let's get started. There's a microscope right here. And throughout my graduate career, my graduate advisor, committee chair, spiritual leader, Linda Adler-Kasner would oftentimes tell the members of my cohort that composition researchers need to examine literacy under a microscope. We approach this stuff and we foreground context sensitivity. We realize that teaching and learning and literacy is site-based ultimately. We want to find out that granular stuff and nuance. So with that in mind, I thought I would take a minute to kind of put the research site under a little bit of a microscope to contextualize all this stuff. That graphic depicts Rosenblatt's transactional theory. Texts and readers both kind of act on each other. And I'm interested in how first-year composition instructors shape that interaction. Not just any first-year composition instructors, the ones at this research site, because they might be different than the ones at other research sites. At this site, during their TA training practicum, TAs are exposed to contemporary composition scholarship on genre, writing about writing, threshold concepts, transfer, disciplinarity. The idea is that will lay part of the foundation for thinking through, from a teaching for transfer kind of perspective, how they leverage their literacy in the course, beyond the course, to the humanities, social sciences, maybe even the hard sciences and for STEM majors. So on the one hand, my participants, these TAs, there were 24 of them who participated in a survey. They came from, they were trained with composition scholarship, but they were hired from the Humanities and Fine Arts Division. They came from humanities disciplines such as history, religious studies, comparative literature, music. So they brought a pretty interesting dual enculturation to their first year comp teaching practices, which to me lent an even more useful dynamic to and reason for studying them. So about halfway through my dissertation project, I stumbled upon this graphic, which I really like. I think it depicts the messiness of guiding reading pretty well, where the different hands might be different instructors and their competing goals. A lot of the stuff is happening upstairs. It's a tacit activity. The impassive expression of the student here. It's tough to get a read on, pun intended, what's going on with their reading. So to kind of give you a feel of what, how I try to reconcile the various methodological decisions in my study, I want you to take a minute to think through some of this stuff yourself. I would like you to think of one of your courses. Got it? Okay. One of your courses, I want you to think about good reading in that class. What does good reading look like? What do students do when they're successfully reading something? What does it require? What does it entail? And I'd like you, if possible, to start off your responses with an ing verb. getting that present progressive action in there. I listed 2 examples at the bottom of the page here. Looking up words in a dictionary. I doubt that's at the top of your goals, but as an example, another one might be evaluating evidence. So I'm going to turn to my assistant here, Mr. Trebek. 30 seconds for this question, please. Good reading in one of your courses. What does it require? What does it entail? What does it look like? Could be first-year composition. Could be business writing and professional communication. Could be introduction to writing studies. Maybe that's your first-year writing course. All right. Now, I would like you, part 2, find one person. We only have time for one. Find one person near you. I'd like you to give them your name, the name of the course, and then the names of 2 or 3 of these good reading characterizations. Come on, introduce yourselves, please. Make some friends. All right. Wrap it up, please. As is always the case with small group work, you know, is it ever done? We got to cap it there, though. So here's what I'm guessing. If I was there and I was able to get maybe 5 or so of your responses, I would bet that our answers would probably be all over the place. We would be talking about cognition, stances. We would be talking about locating sources would possibly be one of the most important good reading characterizations here. So for my study, as a way to wrangle all this together, I tried to cast the widest net possible, and I am using this term, developing this term, rhetorically behaviors. And I define that as what students think, feel, or do before, during, or after the act of reading. So I'm trying to account for all the outcomes of a reader-text transaction, behavioral, cognitive, affective, social learning even. I want to tap into all the different activity associated with reading. I identified 14 of what I thought were the most salient readerly behaviors. Being motivated to read, skimming and scanning, annotating texts, comprehending content, conducting a close reading, reading rhetorically, applying visual literacy, deconstructing genres, reading critically, reading like a writer, summarizing and paraphrasing, using sources and papers, analyzing samples of texts that students would likely have to write, typically an instructor's former student's work. And lastly, discussing a text with classmates. This is a really important, I think, methodological decision here. I captured this language in 2 ways. And I wanted to be careful because I didn't want to be too top-down and heavy-handed. I think it's very important for good literacy research to have a bit of a grounded theory approach, a sort of ethnographic dimension to it. So these 14 readerly behaviors come from both existing terminology in the composition field used by scholars on post-secondary reading. They also come from TA's responses in a pilot study that I conducted. They are both in vivo verbatim responses that they offered. Others, I tried to cut down to the essence of what the respondent was getting to, and I try to kind of polish it up a little bit. So 14 readerly behaviors anchored this study. I wanted to find TA's perceptions about each one of those readerly behaviors as it related to these 5 different statements. Statement 1, Likert scale statements. X is important for student success in FYC. For instance, to what extent do you agree or disagree that annotating texts is an important readerly behavior for student success in first-year composition? The second Likert scale statement was about students' bottlenecks. To what extent do you think students struggle with summarizing and paraphrasing? Next one, I explicitly address X in my teaching practices. Fourth, I had difficulty addressing X, teaching bottleneck. I wanted to find out which readerly behaviors seemed particularly challenging to teach, to guide students towards. That last Likert scale statement, I was interested in readerly behaviors that might have context transcendent value, where they TAs perceived it to be important in both first-year composition and introductory level humanities courses that they might need to take for gen ed requirements, or if they were humanities majors themselves. Remember, my participants were graduate students in humanities disciplines, and almost all of them had experienced TAing in humanities courses or being the instructor of record for humanities courses. All right. So now I'm taking what was like 400 different cells, and I'm reducing it to more of a snapshot here. There's a lot of numbers here, but I want to lead you through what they mean. I didn't use a typical 5-point continuum from strongly disagree to strongly agree. I expanded it to 7. I wanted to create more room for tepid, lukewarm attitudes, like somewhat disagree and somewhat agree. In my life, I somewhat disagree and somewhat agree with most things. So I really wanted to capture definitive attitudes and perceptions here. The percentages that you see in this table indicate TAs who chose agree or strongly agree for each statement about each readerly behavior. So for instance, I'll offer an example to help guide you to read this table. This 67% here in this cell. The translation would be 2/3 of TAs agreed or strongly agreed that being motivated to read was important for student success in first-year composition. So again, these percentages represent the overall percentages of TAs who I'm saying definitively agreed with each statement. So I want us to take a minute here and look at context transcendence. I'm going to put the first year comp column in blue and the intro humanities column we'll put it in red. And I'm going to highlight the readerly behaviors that passed a 75% threshold, where 3/4 or more of the 24 TAs total perceived it to be important or strongly important. They agreed or they strongly agreed. 4 stand out: comprehending content, reading critically, using sources and papers, and this was kind of the dark horse surprise candidate for me. I wasn't expecting this to yield this kind of result, but discussing a text with other classmates was perceived to be as important, as equally important in both first-year comp and introductory level humanities courses. I think that's pretty interesting. Of course, there's the real good stuff, I think, is in the qualitative data. I conducted follow-up interviews with 11 of these TAs based on their survey responses. I just can't get to that stuff in this sort of presentation, especially in a video format. But what I would like to point out, reading like a writer is part of the big story here. TAs perceived it to be not only be super crucial for students' success in first-year comp. All but one TA agreed or strongly agreed that it was important in first-year comp. It was a very explicit part of their teaching practices. So it was important for students, but TAs also acknowledged how important it was in their development as novice writing instructors. It helped them reconceptualize what they were doing from students' perspectives, making them think about scaffolding students' learning and how difficult this all really is from students' vantage point. Of course, quantitative data can only tell us so much. This is just a little snapshot, and if anything, it's a step towards further studies, and plenty more readerly behaviors emerged in the qualitative portions of the study. Parting thoughts. Here's what I'd like to send myself off with, I guess, really. Some questions that might help you think through what it means to guide reading for your own program. That first bullet point, I'm taking Bob Broad's question that he poses in his text dynamic criteria mapping, which I love. He asks, what do we value in students' writing? Well, if we just, recast that to what do we value in students' reading, I bet that would elicit some really good and useful conversations in a departmental workshop, particularly one where instructors are learning with and from each other, writing program with a very bottom-up constructivist mentality. Other useful questions to think through. Talking with individual instructors about specific lessons, I think, is a great idea. So asking someone to describe a successful lesson or activity on reading and why they perceived it to be successful or unsuccessful. To me, that can help get into data points for how, where, when, why we think we're being successful. You might be able to then use that to reconceptualize other teaching practices to strengthen other lessons and activities. So I think that's a really valuable thought point. Lastly, in the interest of making this stuff more explicit and more practical so that students can latch onto it and use it to strengthen their reading development and writing development, as faculty, I think we need to consider what steps and procedures are required to successfully enact particular readerly behaviors. Since this stuff is so wrapped up in our heads and remains at the tacit level, engaging in self-driven, like think aloud protocols where we share the mental moves that we're making. We're modeling that kind of inner monologue, really, I think is very important. So I think there's a lot of good stuff that can come from that. If any of this piqued your interest, I have hopefully some published work that will be coming out from the Journal of College Literacy and Learning, the Higher Education Research and Development Journal, as well as 2 edited collections, a chapter in writing for and about the classroom, and a chapter I co-wrote with my beloved friend and former colleague, Jennifer Johnson at UC Santa Barbara, and the collection is called Not Nearly in a Row. If you have any questions about any of this, if you'd like to chat, more than happy to, really. Please shoot me an email, firstname.lastname@gmail.com, zack.depiero@gmail.com. Thank you for your attention. I wish you a great experience in the rest of the conference, and good luck wrapping up your summer. Have fun. See ya.